Hello, everyone, and welcome to Biohackers Lab. I'm your host, Gary Cohen, and on today's episode, I have Asher Yaron. You would have heard Asher before on the previous episode, and we're going to carry on our conversation today talking about coffee and how we can get the most out of it. Asher, thanks so much for coming on again.
My pleasure.
So we had a massive interview where we talked about the health benefits and why we want to be drinking fresh coffee. And I hope everyone's excited now, as I am, that we want to get our own little roasting machine at home and be the best barista that we truly can be and drink this fresh stuff that actually has a whole other element to it that makes us feel so different. And now that they're making it, and they're sourcing the green beans and they're roasting it and they're going to start brewing it. I want to get more into the brewing process now. So if I can start talking about brewing, a fascinating story that I read in your book was the cold brew process and how you tested the optimal time to make a cold brew. So I don't think people are cold brewing at home yet, but just to talk about, how brewing coffee has a different element to it and brewing fresh coffee and the timing of that. So if you could you tell us the story about what you discovered with cold brew coffee?
Yeah, so so there's a step before the brewing, and that is the grinding. And I think I should just mention a couple of things there because that's really quite important. So the grinding is taking the whole beans that's just been freshly roasted. And there are basically two different kinds of grinders. There's a blade grinder, which is like a blender, right? Which has a blade and
like chops the bean.
Yeah, it's like it chops the coffee, right? And it does a very poor job of consistency. And the grind is extremely important, especially when you have brewing processes that are more concentrated. So, for instance, a stovetop espresso, mocha pot, any espresso machine, the key element there is you have to have a really good grinder. So the other grinding method is called a burr grinder, B-U-R-R. That's a type of grinder. That's not a brand of grinder. And what a burr is if you imagine some gears, right? And the coffee goes through these gears, and these gears fit into each other, and it's grinding the coffee that way. And once the coffee goes through, it goes into a holding tank. So the coffee is going through those grinders and going into a holding tank. It's a much, much more consistent way to grind coffee. Whereas the blade grinder, it's not going through anywhere. You're just turning on that blade, and it's chopping the coffee nearest the blade much more finely than it is the coffee in the outer part. So you end up shaking it, you're trying to mix it and stuff, and it's just really a not very efficient way. And it's funny because I've seen a couple famous Italian name machines that are blade grinders, and they're just more expensive. That makes absolutely no sense because it's the kind of grind method you're using that makes the difference, not if it's an Italian company with an Italian name. It makes no difference. So I recommend a burr grinder, and there's a flat blade burr grinder, and there's also something called a conical burr grinder. I don't think it's that much of a difference. The conical burr grinder is a lot more expensive, and it doesn't heat up the coffee as much as the flat burr grinder. Personally, I don't think there's that much of a difference. If you're using a burr grinder versus a blade grinder, that's a much bigger difference. And you can get a burr grinder for like $50. It's not that expensive. I think it's probably one of the best investments you can make in your coffee. If you're using a blade grinder, you switch to a burr grinder, your coffee is going to be much, much better right away.
So there's a good top tip for anyone straight away.
Yeah. So now there's different brewing methods, and some are weaker than others. So we start off a brewing method of, let's say, like a French press. And with a French press, you're using a coarser grind. Coarser grind means the coffee is bigger pieces, so it's not going to be as dense when you're finished with it. It's a lighter coffee. And you're pouring hot water into this French press, stirring it, and then letting it sit for 4 or 5 minutes, and then putting the plunger down, and you have your coffee. That's a very simple method. It makes a weaker cup of coffee. The next method after that makes a stronger cup of coffee. So I put French press among the most weakest coffees. Now, a lot of people like weak coffee like that. They don't like coffee really strong, you know? And so it's I'm not saying one's better than the other. It's just on personal preference, and I think that everyone should experiment. But it's very affordable to get a French press and not expensive. It's a very simple process, but it makes a weak coffee. The second would be like a drip brewer.
Sorry, yeah, sure. Just before you, Asher, before you get into that, I just want to also help listeners know that you have a picture in your book that shows a French press coffee and the crema that's on it. And I've never seen a crema like that on a French press I've ever had. Right. So again, it's, you know, the French press I think we've all been accustomed to is completely different to the French press experience that you've probably experienced with fresh coffee.
That's right. When you're using that fresh roasted coffee, I mean, every brew is going to be better. It's not about the brewing experience. It's about the fresh roasted. So when I make a French press with freshly roasted coffee and you pour the hot water in it blooms. Okay, and that's what that crema is about. It's like a volcano. It's unbelievable. It's so active and alive. And why is that? Because there are more chemicals there, obviously. It just makes logical sense, and you can see it with your eyes, and you've never experienced anything like that before. And when you see it bloom like that, you see that thick crema, you realize, wow, those are the chemicals. That's the drugs. I'm not going to be taking that into my body. And it's not going to be detrimental. It's going to make me feel really good, you know? So that's one of the best visual ways to see what that fresh roasting process is doing is to make a French press and use older coffee for the French press, pour hot water on it, see what happens, and then use fresh roasted coffee that's just been ground, and wow, you see the difference, and it is dramatic. You never see anything like it. But yeah, that's a very good point. Very good point.
So sorry, you can move into drip coffee now. I just want to let people know. Yeah, French press, fresh coffee. Yeah,
would be like a Mr. Coffee machine, any drip coffee machine, right? And for drip coffee, you're grinding it finer than a French press, and you're putting it into this with a filter, putting it to the top of the filter, and then the water is dripping on top of it, and then going through and brewing into the pot below, right? So one of the tricks that I recommend doing is, because a lot of times the water may not be hitting, all the grounds may not be absorbing that water. So you have dry spots. So what I like to do with the drip coffee brewer is let the water fill up halfway. Then take a spoon, stir it around. Make sure all those grounds are coming in contact with the water, because that's what's going to make the coffee stronger. I mean, that's really what the brewing process is all about. The coffee grinds have to hit the water in order to turn the water a different color. If you're just getting a limited amount of grinds on the water, then it's going to be a much weaker coffee. So that's a hack, let's say, with a drip coffee brewer. It puts if the water's in there, just make sure you stir it up, and you're going to have a better cup of coffee. And also, what you know is what you see also is the bloom as well. You will see the reaction. You will see a crema when that water hits that fresh roasted and freshly ground coffee, and it's very different from what you usually have seen. And the smell, it's a much different process. The whole thing really makes it much different.
Well, that makes, yeah, I've heard about it's important to stir your brewed coffee, halfway through, just to And it makes complete sense now as to why you want to stir. It's because you want to make sure all the surface area of the ground coffee touches water, so you can extract the chemicals out of it.
Exactly right. Exactly.
Yeah.
It's simple, But yeah, people don't think about it that way.
Yeah, I wouldn't even think about that in a drip machine to do that process.
I've noticed some of those drip machines will drip the water just in a very limited area. And if you have a lot of grounds in there, especially if you want to make a stronger cup and you have a lot of grinds in there, maybe some of those grounds aren't coming in contact with the water.
Interesting. Okay. So that's drip coffee, which will be a very common device that people would use in their homes. What would be another brewing method that you would move on to?
So another one would be the mocha pot, which is also called the stovetop espresso. And this was invented in the 1930s in Italy by a guy called Bialetti. And what it was he wanted to make an espresso-like brew, but without a big espresso machine that is using tons of electricity. It's very expensive to run if you're only making coffee by yourself at home. And this became the best-selling coffee brew method in Italy very quickly when it first came out. And just about every Italian household has one of these. I mean, it's really incredible. Very very famous, the Bialetti mocha pot. And what it is there's three parts to it. There's a lower part where you put the water, and then there is the portafilter, which is the part that fits in to where the water reservoir is underneath, and that's where you put the ground coffee. And then there's a top that screws on. And in the top part, there is a pipe that goes up. So the idea is this. The water at the bottom reservoir boils, forces its way up into the coffee sitting just above it, and then forces its way further up this pipe that then comes out in the top reservoir. So it's transferring the water through the coffee from the bottom out into the top. And this is also... Yeah,
and it's a beautiful thing to watch when you lift the lid and you can watch it like flowing out like a fountain.
Yeah. That's exactly how I make it at home. Because it's I don't have a huge espresso machine, so I use the mocha pot, and I keep the lid up because I want to see the crema. I want to see the flow of that, just like what you're mentioning, what you're talking about. But this makes a very strong cup of coffee. It really makes a very strong brew, and it's inexpensive. Maybe you can buy one for $30 or so. And then the neat thing is all of the filters and the rubber seals are replaceable. So you can literally have that same machine for decades. And maybe once every year, once every 2 years, you're replacing the filter and the rubber gaskets, the rubber seals, but they sell those separately. So it's very easy to replace. So it's inexpensive, really inexpensive. So now you're talking about a grinder, $50, maybe a stovetop espresso for $30. You're under $100. And now if you're able to buy a roaster for $200-300, it's really very affordable, and you'll have better coffee than any coffee shop would bake, because most coffee shops are not roasting their own coffee.
Yeah, so it sounds like the mocha pot is a good solution for people who enjoy strong espresso type coffees.
The best solution if they like a really strong cup of coffee. I highly recommend the mocha pot.
Okay.
Yeah, it works really well. So this other process, it's interesting how I came to this process of cold brew, how I discovered it, because I had never heard of it before. And I started roasting my own coffee. This is in Oregon. And I realized I started sharing with my friends, and they loved it. They couldn't believe that his coffee was so good. And I knew that I had to get it to them right after roasting, and they had to use it right away. And I started to supply the local co-op in Ashland, Oregon, the Ashland Food Co-op. And I wanted to be different than all the other coffee that was offered there. And so I put roast dates on my packaging. And I told them every 3 days, I'm going to pick up anything that hasn't sold and I'm going to replace it with my new roast, because I don't want my roasted coffee out there more than 3 days from when it was roasted, because I knew I had to have a better coffee than everybody else. And no one else at that time was putting roast dates on their packaging. And I said, this is going to be the freshest coffee. And I was just a little small, entrepreneur. I mean, there are bigger companies supplying the local co-op. But, a few people noticed, and they'd always go for my coffee, and they saw right on the package when it was roasted. And I would go there every 3 days and pick up anything that didn't sell. And I would literally get a sick feeling in my stomach when I had to pick up coffee that didn't sell, because now this coffee is 3 days old. What am I going to do with it? I really didn't want to throw it out. I want to do everything green and sustainable, and it's past its prime.
Avoid food waste.
Yeah, and that would make me sick. I hated it, right? So through eating raw food, I discovered there were a few raw food restaurants that offered cold brewed coffee, cold pressed or cold brewed coffee. And I wondered what that was, and did a little research and saw that process has been around for a couple hundred years in Japan. And the Dutch actually, in the 1940s, promoted it quite a bit, and we're using it. And what the cold brew process is you take the coffee and you brew it with cold water instead of hot water. And all those three processes that I just described are using hot water to brew the coffee, because it's extracting the most through the hot water. So if you use it as a cold brew process, you're using cold water, kind of like a sun tea. So anybody who's made sun tea, you have tea bags and water and you put it out in the sun, and it's not getting hot like it would as if you boiled the water. But what you're doing is you're leaving it in a longer period of time, so that it takes a longer period of time to extract the flavor and the elements from the cold brew process. So what I discovered was that this cold brew process had different lengths, different hours to brew the coffee, anywhere from 12 hours to 24 hours. And also, you can use different grinds. You can use different recipes as far as how much coffee to how much water. All that stuff is variable. So I started to experiment, and I got a commercial cold brew maker. And I started testing, tasting, and experimenting with all those different factors. And after a couple years, what I discovered was that the best cold brew, in my opinion, was a brew that was 24 hours. Now, compare that to an espresso machine, which is 25 seconds. You're brewing that coffee through an espresso machine at high pressure and heat for 25 seconds and making a shot of espresso. Whereas the cold brew, you're sitting, that ground coffee is sitting in cold or room temperature water for 24 hours before you're separating the grinds from the liquid. Huge difference, right?
Yeah, that's massive.
But the grinds is different also. That's what I found. If you grind it too fine, then you're extracting too much of the acidity and some of the undesirable things of the coffee. So the studies that were out there said that cold brew method had up to 70% less acid than coffee brewed with hot water. That is a huge amount, 70% less acid. And when I started to try it and taste it, it was really smooth. I couldn't believe it. So smooth, less acidic, less bitter, but also had a really good energizing effect. Almost, it felt a little different to me, the energizing effect. It felt more like a timed release. When I had that cold brew coffee in the morning, I felt energized for hours, 6 to 8 hours. I could go on that. It didn't feel like I wanted any food or anything else. I mean, it was really very, very energizing. So I started to experiment with taste. And what I found was that when I fresh roasted the coffee and then used the cold brew method, if I used coffee that was just roasted, it was way too sour. And it makes sense because what it was drawing out of the coffee is antioxidants, but the coffee is a citrus, it's a fruit, it's a citrus fruit, it's a cherry. So those antioxidants were creating a very sour taste. And the sour taste almost is like sour milk somehow. It just tastes like it's spoiled. It doesn't taste like coffee. It just tastes off, right? Mm-hmm. And so then I tried 2 days later, still too sour. 3 days later, a lot more balanced. And then 4 days later, and it started to deteriorate the other way. So I came up with a recipe that had me wait 3 days because it was the best. It tasted the best. Now, it doesn't really make sense from the other method that I'm using is using coffee right after roasting. I recommend if you're brewing with hot water, use it right after roasting. But with this cold brew method, it wasn't good. It was way too sour tasting. Didn't like it. It took 3 days for that to dissipate. So that was the key to this whole system that I then created, where I could go back to the Ashland Food Co-op and any coffee that wasn't sold, I'd take back and I'd make my cold brew with it because it was 3 days old. And when I made the cold brew, I bottle it. And if you take the cold brew and you bottle it and put it in the refrigerator, it lasts minimum 3 weeks without any deterioration. No preservatives, nothing, just the coffee. 3 weeks in the refrigerator as the cold brew method, it doesn't change. It's really good.
Yeah, I just love that idea when I read it in your book to think, wow, so that's one way that we could make coffee in batch. So I'm just thinking if people are super time restricted for whatever reason during the week, they could batch cold brew on the weekend and then have this ready for them during the week, that they just open the fridge and there's some cold brew in their fridge.
Absolutely. It's great that way. And then you can just heat it up. Because it's a great hot coffee too. You don't have to have it cold. You can heat that up.
I never knew this. I've never heard of heating up cold brew before.
Yeah. That's how I would have my cold brew. If I made a batch like that in the refrigerator in the morning, I want a hot cup of coffee. I don't want an iced coffee. So I just heat it on the stove, not in the microwave. I don't recommend the microwave because it changes the molecular structure of foods and liquids. But if you heat it up in a pan on the stove, then wow, it makes a beautiful, smooth cup of coffee that's very energizing. It has lower acid, and the lower acid is really important for many people. So I was making my cold brew coffee, and I started to deliver my cold brew coffee in ball jars. So these old ball jars, and I deliver my cold brew, I think it was 24 ounces at a time, to people. And also because it was now part of my system. I'd roast fresh, and anything that didn't sell 3 days old, boom, I'm making my cold brew. And now I'm selling my cold brew. So it makes my whole system completely green, sustainable, and have zero waste because we sell all the cold brew that we make here in Bali. And I got a call one day, this is back when I was in Oregon, from this woman who was terminally ill. And she loved coffee, but her doctor would not let her drink coffee because it was way too acidic, and it made an imbalance in her system. And she said she had heard that my coffee had 70% less acid. And I said, yeah, well, this is the cold brew coffee that um, creating. And she checked with her doctor. Her doctor said she could have that. It had 70% less acid. And I started delivering my cold brew coffee to her. And this is a woman, she had cancer, terminally ill. She was on 18 different medications. And she loved this cold brew coffee so much. Every time I went to deliver, she would tell me how important it was for her. The coffee got her up in the morning. She was excited to make her coffee, to drink it. And then she got engaged in life, so reading the newspaper, she'd just be engaged in physical activities, and the coffee helped to bridge that gap. Whereas before, she didn't want to get out of bed. She had nothing to look forward to. And now she had this coffee that was going to make her feel great. And she even said it took away her pain. More than her pain medication, the coffee took away her pain. I think it because, maybe it shifted her focus. So now, when you're totally focused on something and you have pain in your body, all of a sudden that pain's not there anymore, right? Because you shifted your consciousness and your focus. But she convinced me how really important as a substance that coffee is, and that this cold brew was for her. It literally changed her life and made her look forward to waking up in the morning.
Yeah, I love those good stories about coffee. So because when I was in the States last year, I saw cold brews becoming so popular, and also over here in the UK now. But and that's why I said I always see it, prepackaged, and then people are drinking cold, and that just what you said again, that actually you can heat it up. It just blows my mind, and I'm just thinking, are there any coffee shops? And I don't know if your coffee shop would do it too, where your cafe, where you would heat up the cold brew for a customer.
Oh yeah, absolutely. We do it all the time. If someone wants cold brew hot, then we'll just use the espresso machine. Just use the steam wand, pour it cold in the refrigerator into a milk jug, and steam wand it. And now it's hot. I've done that many times.
So it's kind of like making cold brew into an espresso, in Americano.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh wow! No, I want to try that. I've never done it, so that's another coffee experience you've put on my checklist that I need to
do. It's a really nice, smooth cup of coffee. I mean, it really is remarkable how smooth it is.
Yeah, and also then I guess we were talking in our previous episode about the freshness factor, and you've mentioned it already. So the cold brew that people might be consuming at supermarkets when they're buying the commercial cold brew, that's a different experience again, would you say? Because the coffee used in that is not going to be the 3-day-old coffee like you found with your experiment.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the questions are, so if it's on the label as it hits all those areas, then I'd say, okay, go for it. But if they don't know, first of all, is it 100% Arabica, or is it a blend? Is there's some Robusta in it? Where's the coffee from? What's the origin of that coffee? Right? When was that coffee roasted? If it was roasted more than 3 days, then you're not going to get as good benefits out of it. What was the brewing process? A lot of these cold brews are 12 to 16 hours. And in my opinion, it makes a very weak coffee. I would rather, and I've experimented a lot with that, I really like the 24-hour brew because it is really strong. And if you don't like it that strong, just dilute it with a little water. Then the bottle lasts you twice as long. If you took that cold brew, that 24-hour, and you added as much water to it as the coffee, now you have 2 bottles and not just like 1 bottle of coffee, right? So why not satisfy people who like a very strong cup? And if you don't like a strong cup, okay, so you don't have to use as much, and you'll have more coffee. So it's that brew time as well. So those are the 3 things that I would. Then you have to ask the question. Okay, so I'm now in the process of creating a home cold brew maker, because there has been one on the market since the 1970s, and it's called the Toddy, Toddy. And it's called a toddy because the guy who created it, I think his name is like Todd Simpson or something like that. And he created this cold brew method and the method of making it. And what it pretty much is a few plastic pieces, a plastic container where the coffee drips into, a plastic piece where you put the grinds, and then the plastic piece on top where you pour the water. But it's all plastic, and I'm not a big fan of plastic. So I'm making a home stainless steel model that is similar to the stainless steel commercial model that I'm now creating. And so I want to offer that to people. And that will be something that I'll have on the powerroaster.com site. I haven't mentioned that yet in this, but that on my sites, I want people to have access to all these different methods of brewing, and I want to be able to do that affordably because I think that's really very important, and also with materials that will last. The plastic piece, I think it's about $30, really inexpensive for the toddy kit to make cold brew coffee. And you can do a search. Anyone can do a search online, TODDY, and look it up. It's a cold brew brand. But they use plastic, and I'm just not a big fan of that.
Yeah, no, I'm also I prefer not, especially. I'm going to have another guest on where we talk about things that come from plastic. And hot plastic, when you're putting a hot liquid that touches a plastic, I think a lot of listeners also they don't want to experience potential leaching of chemicals that come from that. But I love the idea that you'll be able to bring the power of cold brewing into the home again, because I am seeing a rise in cold brew popularity, and what you're talking about here is all that hacking, all the experimentations where you get to learn, this is how I like my cold brew. And you've shared some great tips again that people can start experimenting when they do get a unit to play with at home to get a better experience out of their cold brew.
Yeah, so my experience has been that some people are really into coffee, and for them this just makes total sense. They're do-it-yourself, or they'll take to it. They'll do it on their own. And then you have people who just can't be bothered, right? So they'll just buy what's in the stores, and they don't want to spend any time doing it. But then you have a big population, I think, in the middle, that once they experience the difference of doing it themselves at home and experience the quality difference, it's so dramatic that they'll take to it. So I really see this as something that is going to the home with all of the roasting, the brewing methods, all these different ways. Because it's like taking the most important substance that you take during the day and now making it yourself, how you like it, and in a way that is creating the best product available anywhere.
Yeah, and as you mentioned in the previous episode we did about the ceremony and the 3 steps that are involved in the ceremony.
Right. Roasting, grinding, and brewing, and taking that from green to cup.
Yeah.
From green to cup. I mean, that is amazing. And you're doing it all in your home, and you're doing it in a matter of minutes.
So we've talked about some good processes so far. I just want to touch on a couple of other ones before our time. The AeroPress is really popular. Any thoughts on that?
I haven't used the AeroPress a lot, but I think it's a great design, and a lot of people really like it. And it's just a brewing method. So here's the thing about these different brewing methods. And there was just a Kickstarter campaign for something called the Right Press, RITE press, and they they raised over $1 million for this thing. And what it is, this engineer, and it's pretty much a French press, but it has a removable bottom, so it's just easy to clean. It's the only difference. It looks good, and it's just a lot easier to clean because the French press usually, can be a pain to clean. It's messy. You get a lot of grinds that you have to spoon out of the bottom. But this has the bottom just unscrews and just dump it out right into your garbage, right? Raised $1 million. So 25,000 units, something like that they sold, right? And this is the thing that that kind of gets to me. So people think that method is going to make them better coffee, and it's not. The only thing it's doing is it's going to make it a little more convenient. Or with an AeroPress, if you're using the same coffee, all that's going to do is maybe make the brew a little better. But it's not going to change much. It's not going to change than if you're using fresh roasted coffee. That will make the biggest difference, hands down, with anything that you're doing. If you want to improve your coffee experience, you've got to roast it yourself.
Mm. And yeah, we discussed that with the different waves and how people were too focused maybe on just the taste or aroma. And as you said, there's a whole other aspect that's unlocked when you look at fresh coffee. And yeah, so you're trying to be the best barista at home with your different brew methods, but you'll actually get a better experience. And probably the one question I actually didn't ask you was, what, from a taste perspective, what did you find the differences between fresh coffee and, let's call it, coffee that's been roasted for weeks or months, from a taste perspective?
So the biggest difference is people will say when they taste fresh roasted coffee, it's not bitter. I don't taste any bitterness. And then if you have coffee that's been sitting for weeks or months, it only tastes bitter. So how is that possible? No bitterness on the fresh roast, and then it becomes bitter. It develops into this bitterness? No, nothing develops. Once the coffee is roasted, it just decomposes. Nothing develops from that state, okay? But what happens is when it's fresh roasted like that, there are lots of other tastes there. There are lots of other elements. There's sour taste. There's sweet taste. The bitterness, it's there, but it's overpowered by these other elements. And what happens is these other elements are the first to leave the coffee. So as the coffee is aging, it's becoming more bitter, but it's not really becoming more bitter. The bitterness is more exposed because these other elements are leaving. And that's the main thing. So sour taste, the antioxidants, like we talked in the cold brew, the sour taste when it's too fresh cold brew, it's very sour. Those sour tastes are antioxidants. I will bet that cold brew after a day is going to give you a lot more antioxidants than after 3 days. If you don't mind that sour taste. Most people do not like that sour taste. But if you don't mind that sour taste, you just want a healthier coffee, then drink it right after. Then do a cold brew right after roasting because it's going to have those sour tastes. That's those sour tastes, which have the antioxidants. They're the first to leave the coffee, depending on when you brew it. If you just pull a shot of espresso and you leave it sit there for 20 seconds, 30 seconds, it's less sour. After every second, after every minute, even more. So it's almost the same. If you pull that shot of espresso and you try it right after you pull that shot of espresso, it doesn't taste bitter at all. And there's so much going on in there. It's so fresh, right? But if you leave that shot, let's say for a minute and a half, and then you taste it, it's going to taste bitter because all of those elements that were created have already gone. They've left. They're what is called volatiles, and they don't last around very long. So that's a similar experience of tasting the fresh roasted coffee. and coffee that's been roasted days, weeks, or months before that's been sitting there.
And what you're saying too, that's so interesting, where I'm just thinking of a typical experience someone would have when they go down to their coffee shop to meet a friend for a cup of coffee. And, the barista then does the coffee for them, and then they bring it to the table, and people might just have a little sip and then leave it for a long time whilst they're chatting. And just thinking, whilst you're talking, your coffee's degrading, and you're getting a different experience from your coffee in that situation. So if you're an espresso drinker, is it then a top tip is to order your espresso and then shoot it down, like I see people do in Italy?
And that's exactly how they do it in Italy. They have espresso bars, and that's exactly how they do it. They hit the shot of espresso, there it is. They shoot it down, and they're on their way. They don't stop for very long. They're not sipping. They're not sippers. They're taking it in right away.
That's what I noticed when I traveled there, and I'm like, wow, it's a completely different culture for drinking coffee.
Yeah.
So that, and what you just said there, that's what just got me thinking, like, oh, fascinating, interesting.
Yeah. It's like they're tuning in to the chemicals, right? Just give me a shot. I just want a shot. Boom. Okay. I'm done. I'm on my way. That's exactly what I needed. Thank you. Right?
Yeah. Yeah, so I'm going to try that. Just shoot an espresso rather than sip an espresso. So that just to
and
see
you
that what
notice that when you're sipping it, the taste is changing. Every second, the taste is changing. Nothing's developing. Doesn't make sense that things are developing after it's already cooked, right? That's kind of like cooking food, and so the tastes are developing. No, nothing's. It's decomposing. Now, why does food? But sometimes with some food, it tastes better the next day, right?
Mm-hmm.
Probably a reason for that. So maybe because some of the tastes that were there that have now deteriorated and left aren't there anymore, and you're tasting other stuff. Right?
Yeah. So would you have any other top tips for people that like to go to coffee shops when they speak with their barista, that some of the lingo or the language that they could ask to customize or make sure? So like the one thing is I hate it when I go to a coffee shop and the barista cooks the coffee too much. It's boiling when I get it. It's just so hot you can't drink it. And I didn't know, is there like a way that I can ask a barista, don't cook the coffee, or are there any other top tips you would recommend to people?
Well, so when I go into a coffee shop, I always ask, when was this coffee roasted? Is it 100% Arabica? And usually my answers are unsatisfactory, so I don't order coffee. Because usually the barista has no idea when it was roasted, or they have to go back and look on the package, and it might be 2 weeks old. No thanks. I don't want to drink that kind of coffee. So I think that unfortunately, it's I think a no-win experience if you're going into a coffee shop and asking those questions to the barista, because the barista isn't trained with this knowledge that we're talking about, and they won't know how to respond. And of course, they think that they know a lot more than you do about coffee because they've been trained and they've learned and practiced certain things without testing themselves. They just, so yeah, it's kind of difficult at the moment. 10 years from now, when you walk into a coffee shop and you see green coffee and you can choose your origin, you can choose your vintage year, whatever, that will be the difference. And that will be when I think the consumer and the barista will be on the same level. But that's why baristas get caught the term coffee snob, and there just seems to be an attitude of some people who work at coffee shops, like they know it all, they know better, and I don't think it's true at all. I think actually by knowing more, they know less because they know more of things that aren't necessarily true or the wrong things, you know? Yes.
Yeah, and I think what you've explained also is that because we're all individual, we all have different tastes and different experiences with coffee, and it's a journey for both the barista and us, and maybe even the barista to find out. I think of them like a chef. They're cooking my coffee for me, and or the roaster is too. But it would be interesting to find out, are you sort of more medium roast, a light roast, a dark roast? All these questions, as you said, that we'll probably 10 years from now all be having these conversations when we're ordering our cup of coffee, which will be a fantastic experience when going out to meet a friend, I think. So we've come up on our time again. What are the links that people can find out more about you and keep in touch with you?
Right. So there's two sites. One is for our products, our roasting machines, and in the future we're going to add some grinding and brewing machines. And that's powerroaster.com, www.powerroaster.com. And then there's another site that we're putting together called coffeetruther.com. And on that site, I have my YouTube Coffee University videos. I've done about 57 different instructional videos about different aspects of coffee on my YouTube Coffee University channel. Those will all be listed on the Coffee Truther site. That's coffee, COFFEETRUTHER.com. And I will also have my book on that site. That site we're putting together as a compilation of all this information, all the videos I've made, articles I've written, in like a one-stop shop for the information. And it's freely given. I just want to get this information out there and have people try this on their own because I believe it really makes an incredible difference.
Yeah, so we can all get a degree in coffee from your site with your YouTube videos. Yeah.
So on my videos, like Coffee University, I call it Coffee University, and people had to watch each video and log each video, and they get a certain amount of credits for logging for watching the video. Let's say 2 credits per video, and the videos are only like 3 or 4 minutes long. And then when they repeated it, watched it again, they get half as much credit because I'm a big believer in repetition and not getting everything all at the same time. When you hear something 3, 4, 5, 6 times, it really sinks in. You get it on a whole different level than if you just hear something once, right? So before I was offering Coffee University diplomas that I would print out for people who got a certain number of credits. I think it was like 100 credits, 108 credits, something like that. Not doing that anymore, but I highly recommend educating and watching these and also seeing other points of view. There's a lot more out there that people are talking about. One of the things I recommend is joining the Facebook group, a coffee roaster Facebook group, Home Coffee Roasters. I have been a part of this Facebook group for just a few weeks, and the amount of information out there and the amount of people who are so passionate about coffee and showing what they're doing and sharing information. It's the most active Facebook group I've ever been involved in. I mean, it's really amazing. Every day people are joining and everyone's talking about what they're doing to roast their own coffee and where they're sourcing equipment, materials, green coffee, all that kind of thing. That's really very exciting. And I think that site is Home Coffee Roasters. It's a Facebook site. It's an open group. You can ask to join the group, and people are joining. And if you don't have any coffee experience, I recommend it because it's a great place to learn about roasting, home roasting, and coffee.
Brilliant. Well, I'll put all of those links in the show notes for listeners. And I just want to say thank you again for all of the knowledge bombs you've dropped about coffee in episode 1 about why we need to be drinking fresh roast coffee, and in this episode about brew methods and tips. And yeah, there's just so many good actionable tips that people can take away. So I just want to say thank you again, Asher, for coming on.
Hey, you're welcome. It's been a pleasure. I really enjoyed it.